The cheap fabric of the folding chair bites into the back of my legs. I can smell popcorn, a faint, buttery ghost from some other event, mingling with the scent of hairspray and nervous sweat that fills the high school gymnasium. The air is thick with it, a humid cloud of parental pride. Around me, cameras flash and parents crane their necks, their faces tight with anticipation. My own hands are clenched in my lap, my knuckles white. My son, Leo, is on the stage. My son. He adjusts the microphone, and a soft screech echoes through the cavernous room before settling. He looks so small up there, swallowed by the dark blue gown, yet he stands with a stillness that seems impossibly adult. His eyes scan the crowd, a sea of beaming faces, and for a fraction of a second, they find mine. He gives me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A secret language we've spoken for 18 years. My heart swells, a painful, beautiful ache that threatens to spill from my eyes. He is the valedictorian. My son. All those nights with flashcards, the weekends spent at debate tournaments, the quiet, exhausted mornings before exams, it all led to this. This perfect, shining moment. But it isn't perfect. Next to me is an empty chair. A void. A gaping, screaming hole where my husband, Mark, should be. I can feel its emptiness like a physical presence, cold and mocking. He's on a business trip. A last-minute, career-defining, can't-be-missed business trip. His apology over the phone last night was a symphony of practiced regret. I listened to it echo in my head, a tinny, hollow sound against the backdrop of 1,000 proud heartbeats in this gym. Leo clears his throat, and the room falls silent. The world holds its breath. And all I can think about is that empty chair and the man who chose it over this. If you've ever felt that strange, sharp mix of soaring pride and crushing pain, a moment that is supposed to be perfect but is fractured by a loss you can't explain to anyone around you, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story feels like one you need to hear, please subscribe. It helps me share these moments more than you can possibly know. It feels like only yesterday that our life was a carefully curated photograph of suburban success. Our house, a 2-story colonial with pristine white trim, sat on a street lined with oak trees that turned a fiery, magnificent gold in the fall. We had a golden retriever named Gus who slept at the foot of our bed. On weekends, Mark would grill burgers in the backyard, the smoke curling up into the blue summer sky, while I'd make lemonade from scratch, the way his mother taught me. We were the picture, the one people looked at and thought, they have it all. And for a long time, I believed we did. Mark was a partner at a downtown firm, a man who wore his ambition like a well-tailored suit. He was charming, with a laugh that could fill a room and make you feel like you were the only one in on the joke. He was the sun, and I, for a long time, was happy to be a planet in his orbit. My world revolved around him, and more, around Leo. Leo was my masterpiece. From the moment he was born, a tiny, scowling creature with a shock of dark hair, he was my everything. I was the one who read him to sleep every night, my voice growing hoarse as I worked through entire fantasy trilogies. I was the one who built sprawling Lego cities with him on the living room floor, and the one who held him when he cried after falling off his first bike. When he started school, his mind lit up. He was insatiably curious, devouring books like they were air. I nurtured it, turning our kitchen table into a science lab, our weekends into museum trips. Mark was proud, of course. He'd ruffle Leo's hair at the dinner table and say, "That's my boy. Going to be a CEO one day." He'd show up for the big things, the championship soccer game, the awards assembly where Leo would inevitably collect a handful of certificates. He'd stand there, beaming, accepting the congratulations from other parents as if he'd been the one diagramming sentences at midnight. I never corrected them. It was easier that way. His pride was a part of the photograph, and I was the curator, making sure everything stayed in frame. But pictures can be deceiving. The distance between us started as a hairline crack, something you could barely see. It was the late nights at the office that became more frequent. The business trips that stretched from 2 days to 4. The way his phone was always angled away from me, its screen a dark, reflective secret. I'd tell myself it was the pressure of his job, the economy, the stress of providing for his family. I made excuses for the silence that grew between us, a silence that filled the spaces once occupied by laughter and shared dreams. I focused on Leo. His triumphs became my triumphs. His future was the project that consumed me. The college applications were a mountain we climbed together. I edited his essays, drilled him for interviews, and created spreadsheets of deadlines and financial aid forms. Mark would occasionally ask from the doorway of Leo's room, "Everything under control in here, champ?" Leo would nod, I would smile, and Mark would retreat back to his office, satisfied that his paternal duties had been fulfilled. The inciting incident, the moment the first tremor shook the foundation of our carefully constructed life, was an envelope. It was thick, creamy cardstock, addressed in elegant calligraphy. The invitation to Leo's high school graduation. I opened it at the kitchen island, my heart thrumming with a familiar beat of pride. But tucked inside was a smaller, separate letter addressed to me and Mark. A letter from the principal. "It is with immense pleasure," it began, "that we inform you that your son, Leo Martin, has been selected as this year's valedictorian." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Tears welled in my eyes. Valedictorian. All his hard work, all our hard work, had culminated in this incredible honor. I waited for Mark to get home, the letter clutched in my hand like a winning lottery ticket. I rehearsed the moment in my head. I'd show it to him. He'd sweep me up in a hug. We'd call Leo down and celebrate with a spontaneous pizza night, just like we used to. He walked in just after 8, loosening his tie and dropping his briefcase by the door with a heavy sigh. "Rough day," he mumbled, heading for the liquor cabinet. "Mark, wait." "Look," I said, my voice trembling with excitement as I held out the letter. He took it, his eyes scanning the words without much interest at first. Then they widened slightly. Valedictorian.
Huh.
Well, what do you know? Good for him. He handed the letter back to me and poured himself a glass of scotch. "That's great, honey." Really, there was no hug.
No triumphant shout.
Just a detached acknowledgement before turning his attention to the amber liquid in his glass. "That's it?" I asked, the excitement draining out of me, replaced by a cold, creeping disappointment. "Mark, this is huge." "I know it is," he said, his back still to me. "I'm proud of him. I'm just tired." Long week, he took a long swallow of his drink. "Of course I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world." The words were right, but the music was wrong. His promise felt thin, brittle. It was a line delivered by an actor who had forgotten his motivation. I stood there in the silent kitchen, the letter in my hand suddenly feeling like a piece of paper, not a trophy. The photograph was starting to curl at the edges, the glossy finish beginning to peel away, revealing the plain, empty truth underneath. And for the first time, I felt a genuine tremor of fear. A fear that the empty space in our marriage was about to become a chasm, right when we should have been standing closest together. In the weeks that followed, the chasm widened. The house became a stage for a play I didn't know I was cast in. Mark was a ghost in his own home, present in body, but absent in spirit. Our conversations were clipped, functional. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning? Don't forget the HOA meeting is Thursday." We were business partners running a household. The intimacy we once shared now just a memory of a warmer climate. I threw myself into graduation planning with a frantic energy, as if my sheer force of will could stitch our family back together for this one perfect day. I ordered a custom cake with "Congratulations, Valedictorian," piped in elegant blue icing. I sent out invitations for a small party at our house afterward, a gathering of the few family and friends who had genuinely been there for Leo. Each RSVP was a small affirmation, a confirmation that this day mattered, that he mattered. Mark remained a distant observer. When I tried to show him the proofs for the graduation announcements, he glanced at them for less than a second. "Looks fine, honey." Whatever you think is best, his praise for Leo became performative, delivered with the forced enthusiasm of a man reading a script. "Heard you aced that final physics exam, son. Knew you had it in you. It was all surface, no depth." Leo, ever perceptive, started to retreat into himself. The easy, bright chatter at the dinner table faded into a tense silence, punctuated only by the clinking of our silverware. Then came the first mention of the trip. Mark brought it up casually one evening, swirling the ice in his glass. Looks like I might have to fly out to the coast for a few days. Big potential client. Could be a game changer for the firm. My stomach tightened. The coast? When? Not sure yet. They're still finalizing the details. Probably the week before graduation. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. The week before? My voice was sharper than I intended. Mark, that's cutting it close. There's so much to do. I know. I'll be back in plenty of time. Don't worry, he gave me a quick, dismissive smile. It's just a few days. I wouldn't miss the big day for anything. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with a sickening speed. The few days soon became a full week. The trip was suddenly scheduled to end the day before the ceremony. He'd have to take a red-eye flight back, arriving just in time to shower, change, and head to the gymnasium. It was a logistical nightmare, a plan so full of potential failure that it felt intentional. I started to feel like a detective in my own life, searching for clues that would confirm the awful truth my gut was screaming at me. One afternoon, while gathering his laundry, a receipt fell out of his suit pocket. It was from a restaurant downtown, a chic, expensive place known for its romantic ambience. A place he'd always complained was too pretentious. The date on the receipt was from a night he'd claimed to be working late at the office. The table was for two. I held the small piece of paper in my hand, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was just a receipt. It could mean anything. A business dinner. A client meeting. But I knew, in that deep, intuitive part of myself that I had been silencing for months, I knew. It wasn't a client. The arguments started then. They weren't loud, screaming matches. They were quiet, vicious battles fought in whispers after Leo had gone to bed. Why do you have to go now, Mark? Can it wait? I'd plead, holding up his itinerary. It's the only time they're available. This is a multi-million-dollar account, Sarah. This sets us up for life. It sets Leo up for life. Isn't that what you want? He was a master at turning it around, and making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, that my desire for him to be present was somehow jeopardizing our son's future. I want you here, I said, my voice small. Leo wants you here. And I will be here, he'd insist, his voice rising with frustration. God, can't you trust me? I said I'll be there, and I will be there. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the end. The house grew colder. Leo would walk into a room where we'd been arguing, and the tension would hit him like a physical blow. He'd stop, his shoulders would slump, and he'd retreat back to his room without a word. The light in his eyes, the brilliant spark of excitement about his achievement, was dimming. He was watching his parents crumble in the final stretch of his childhood, and the guilt was eating me alive. I was trying to hold a castle together that was already turning to sand, and the tide was coming in fast. The walls of our pristine colonial home began to feel like a prison. The silence was an active entity, a suffocating presence that followed me from room to room. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the next lie, the next excuse. Mark moved through the house like a polite stranger, our interactions reduced to a series of logistical exchanges. He was packing for his trip, laying out suits on the bed we no longer truly shared. Each perfectly folded shirt felt like a betrayal. I packed your gray tie, I said, my voice flat, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. The one Leo gave you for Christmas, it was a weak attempt, a pathetic little test.
Oh.
Thanks, he didn't even look up from his suitcase. Just toss it in, he was closing himself off, piece by piece, building a wall between us that was becoming insurmountable. The rising challenges weren't just emotional, they were logistical. Relatives started calling, confirming their travel plans for the graduation party. We're so excited to see you both. Mark must be bursting with pride, my aunt would chirp over the phone. I'd force a smile into my voice.
He is.
He absolutely is. Each lie was a small paper cut on my soul. I was the keeper of the family myth, the public relations manager for a company that was about to declare bankruptcy. Leo grew quieter. He spent more time in his room with the door closed. He was supposed to be celebrating, enjoying the last few weeks of high school with his friends. Instead, he was carrying the weight of our fractured home on his young shoulders. One evening, I found him in the kitchen, staring at the graduation invitation pinned to the corkboard. "Are you excited?" I asked softly, coming to stand beside him. He didn't look at me. He just traced the outline of his own name with his finger. "Is Dad really going to make it back in time?" His voice was devoid of emotion, a simple request for information. It was worse than if he'd been angry. The hope had already been leached out of him. "He said he would," I answered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's moving heaven and earth to be here." Leo finally turned to look at me. His eyes, so much like mine, were filled with a weary understanding that was far too old for an 18-year-old. He knew I was lying, or at the very least, he knew I was trying to convince myself. He gave me a sad, small smile and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the glossy invitation and the reflection of a tired, desperate woman in the kitchen window. My suspicions intensified. I was becoming a person I didn't recognize. I'd check his phone when he was in the shower, my hands shaking so badly I could barely enter his passcode, which, insultingly, was still our anniversary. There was a text chain with a name I didn't know. Chloe. The messages were innocuous enough on the surface. "Can't wait to see you. The hotel looks amazing," counting down the minutes, but the context was everything. The hotel she was referring to was in the same city as his career-defining meeting. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, gut-wrenching finality. This wasn't a business trip. It was a vacation. A romantic getaway. He was leaving, not for a client, but for another woman. And he was choosing her over his own son's graduation. The rage that filled me was so potent, so absolute, it almost made me dizzy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his phone against the wall and watch it shatter. I wanted to confront him, to see the look on his face when his carefully constructed web of lies was torn apart. But I thought of Leo. A huge, ugly fight right before his big day would destroy him. It would taint his memory of this achievement forever. So I swallowed the rage. I choked it down until it became a hard, cold knot in my stomach. I put the phone back on his nightstand, exactly where I found it, and walked out of the room. My strategy had to change. This was no longer about convincing him to come home. This was about survival. It was about getting my son across that stage with his head held high, even if his world and mine was burning to the ground. The midpoint had arrived. The war had been declared in the silence of my own heart, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that I would be fighting it alone. The night before the graduation arrived like a death sentence. The house was unnaturally quiet. Leo was at a friend's house, a last-minute study session that I knew was just an excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I was grateful for it. I needed the space to fall apart, and I couldn't do that under his watchful, worried gaze. My phone rang at 10:17 p.m. The caller ID flashed Mark. I stared at it for a long moment, the screen's glow illuminating my face in the dark living room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I knew what this call was. This was the kill shot. I finally answered, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Hello? Sarah?" "Hey," he sounded breathless, stressed. It was a good performance. I had to give him that. "Listen, something's happened." I waited, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. "The deal, it's falling apart," he said, the manufactured panic in his voice making me sick. "The client is getting cold feet. I have to stay. I have to be here for the meeting in the morning to salvage this."
I am so sorry.
There it was. The final, predictable nail in the coffin of my hope. The rage I had been suppressing for weeks began to bubble up, hot and acidic. "A meeting?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "A meeting on a Saturday morning?" There was a pause on his end. They're flying in from overseas. It's the only time they can do it. Honey, please don't be angry. This is killing me. You have no idea how much I want to be there. I think I have a pretty good idea, I said, the coldness in my tone sharp enough to cut glass. You've made it abundantly clear what your priorities are. That's not fair, he shot back, his voice rising in manufactured indignation. I'm doing this for us.
For our family.
For Leo's future. Do you have any idea the kind of pressure I'm under? No, Mark, I said, and for the first time, my voice was steady, free from the tremor of tears. A strange, chilling clarity washed over me. The spell was broken. I wasn't his wife anymore in that moment. I was an observer watching a very bad actor. Tell me about the pressure you're under. Tell me about your hotel. Is it nice? Does it have a good view? The line went completely silent. I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. He was caught. I had just called his bluff without ever showing my hand. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Don't you? I let out a short, bitter laugh. Have a good trip, Mark. Enjoy your meeting, but don't you dare call me again pretending to be a father. You lost that right tonight. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I just placed it carefully on the coffee table. The knot of rage in my stomach had dissolved, replaced by an empty, echoing cold. The marriage was over. It died in that moment, not with a bang, but with a pathetic, cowardly lie. The world had shifted on its axis. My fight was no longer for a man who didn't exist, but for the boy who would be home in an hour, the boy whose heart I was about to break. The next morning was gray and overcast, the sky a perfect reflection of my mood. The air was heavy with the promise of rain that never came. I moved through the house on autopilot, making coffee I couldn't drink, toasting bread I couldn't eat. The silence was absolute. Mark's side of the bed was pristine, untouched. His closet was slightly emptier. The whole house felt hollowed out, like a beautiful seashell with a life long gone from it. Telling Leo was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. He came into the kitchen, already dressed in his shirt and slacks, ready to put on his gown. He looked hopeful. Despite everything, a small part of him had still believed his dad would come through. I saw it in the way he kept glancing at the clock, the way he'd perk up every time a car drove down our street. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd diagrammed sentences and built volcanoes out of baking soda. I took his hand. It felt so big in mine now, no longer the small, chubby hand of a child. Your dad's not going to make it, I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Leo didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just deflated. I watched it happen in slow motion. His shoulders slumped. The light in his eyes, which had been flickering with a fragile hope, went out completely. He pulled his hand from mine and stared down at the table, at the familiar grain of the wood. Oh, he said, just that one word. It was quiet, empty. It was the sound of a final door closing. His meeting ran late. I started to say, the practiced life feeling flimsy and absurd. Leo looked up at me, and his expression stopped me cold. It was one of profound, weary disappointment. It's okay, Mom, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You don't have to lie for him anymore. My breath hitched. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd known all along, and he'd been protecting me from it, just as I'd been trying to protect him. We had been circling each other, two wounded animals trying to shield the other from the hunter we both knew was in the woods. In that moment, the last of my resolve crumbled. The tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally came, silent and hot, streaming down my face. Leo stood up, came around the table, and wrapped his arms around me. He was taller than me now. His hug was strong, steady.
He was comforting me.
My son, on the biggest day of his young life, was holding his mother together. The role reversal was a brutal, beautiful testament to the man he had become, not because of his father, but in spite of him. We drove to the school in near silence. I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me as I found my seat in the gymnasium. The empty chair next to me felt less like a void and more like an accusation. Every smiling, complete family was a reminder of my own failure. I saw other mothers whispering, their eyes darting from me to the empty seat and back again. The pity was suffocating. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of that noisy, joyful room and never look back. I felt like a fraud, a single mother playing the part of a happy, supportive parent at a celebration of family and success. Everything seemed to be falling apart, the carefully constructed image of our life shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Then I saw him. Leo was lining up with the other graduates at the side of the stage. He looked so alone, staring straight ahead, his face a pale, stoic mask. He wasn't talking to his friends. He wasn't laughing. He was just standing there, a solitary figure in a sea of blue gowns. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The despair, the shame, the overwhelming sadness, it all burned away, replaced by a white-hot, protective rage. This was not my day of failure. This was his day of triumph. He had worked his entire life for this moment. He had earned that place on that stage. And I would not let Mark's selfish, cowardly actions poison it for him. Not for one more second. I sat up straighter. I lifted my chin. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. I would not be the grieving wife today. I would be the proud mother. I would clap loud enough for two people. I would cheer with the force of an entire family. He would look out into that crowd and see me, and he would know that he was not alone. He would know that he was loved fiercely, completely, and unconditionally. My new determination settled over me like a suit of armor. The battle was not over. It had just begun. The ceremony dragged on, a blur of names and speeches. My focus was singular, a laser beam fixed on my son. When the principal finally announced, "And now, it is my great honor to introduce the valedictorian of this year's graduating class, Leo Martin," my heart leaped into my throat. The applause was thunderous. Leo walked to the podium with a composure that stunned me. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the faces until it once again landed on mine. He held my eyes for a long beat, and in that silent exchange, something passed between us. A promise. A shared understanding. Then, he took a deep breath and began to speak. His speech was everything I knew it would be. It was brilliant, witty, and profound. He spoke about the future not as a destination, but as a series of choices. He talked about the importance of curiosity, of kindness, of building bridges instead of walls. He had the entire gymnasium in the palm of his hand. Teachers were nodding, students were cheering, parents were wiping away tears. I was crying again, but this time, the tears were pure, unadulterated pride. He was magnificent.
He was nearing the end.
He shuffled his note cards, a small, human gesture that made my heart ache. In closing, he said, his voice ringing with confidence, "I want to thank the people who helped me get here." He thanked his teachers, his friends, his grandparents.
Standard valedictory fare.
Then he paused. The silence stretched, pregnant with anticipation. He looked down at his notes, and then looked back up, his eyes finding mine once more. This time, his gaze was unwavering, intense. "And finally," he said, his voice suddenly clear and sharp, cutting through the warm, sentimental atmosphere of the room, "I need to thank the one person who is most responsible for my being on this stage today. The person who stayed up with me until 2 a.m. finishing projects, who quizzed me on vocabulary words until her voice was hoarse, who drove me to every single debate tournament, and who never once let me believe that my dreams were out of reach." He took another breath, and I felt it in my own lungs. The entire room was leaning forward, hanging on his every word. "So, I want to dedicate this achievement to the single most important person in my life. I want to thank my mother," he said, his voice ringing with a strength that shook the very foundations of the room. He paused, letting the words land. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. "My single mother, who raised me alone." A collective gasp went through the gymnasium. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like the wind being knocked out of 1,000 people at once. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Every eye in the room swiveled from Leo on the stage to me in the crowd. I was frozen, my hand over my mouth, the tears streaming down my face. It was a declaration, a public rewriting of our family history. A truth so sharp and so potent it had the power to shatter a life of lies. Then, a single person started to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire gymnasium was on its feet, a roaring wave of applause washing over me. It wasn't just for Leo anymore. It was for me.
They were seeing me.
Not the pitted wife with the empty chair next to her, but the single mother who had raised a remarkable man. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, Mark sat in the plush lobby of a 5-star resort. A glass of champagne sat sweating on the marble table in front of him. A beautiful woman, Chloe, was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting casually on his thigh. He felt a vibration in his pocket. A notification from his cousin, who had texted earlier saying she'd be live-streaming the graduation for the family. He smiled at Chloe.
"1 second, babe.
Gotta see my son's big moment. The kid's a genius." Valedictorian, he pulled out his phone, a smug sense of pride swelling in his chest. He was having it all. The successful career, the beautiful mistress, and the brilliant son whose achievements he could still take credit for from a distance. He clicked the link. The video was a little shaky, but the audio was clear. He saw Leo on the stage, looking confident and handsome. He listened to the speech, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. That's my boy, he thought. He took a sip of champagne, feeling magnanimous. Then Leo paused. Mark leaned closer to the screen. I want to thank my mother, Leo said.
Mark nodded, smiling.
Of course. Acknowledge your mother. Good boy. My single mother, who raised me alone. The smirk on Mark's face vanished. It didn't just fade. It was wiped clean, as if by a physical blow. The words echoed in the high-end lobby, though only he could hear them. Single mother. Raised me alone. The phone in his hand felt impossibly heavy. The camera on the live stream panned, shaky but deliberate, to find me in the crowd. It zoomed in on my face, on my tears, on the raw, undeniable truth of the moment. Then it panned back to Leo, standing tall and resolute on the stage, accepting a standing ovation. What's wrong? Chloe asked, her laughter dying as she saw the color drain from his face. Mark, what is it? He couldn't answer. He was frozen. This wasn't just a teenage jab. This wasn't an angry outburst. This was a calculated, public execution. His son, his brilliant, valedictorian son, had used his moment of ultimate triumph to strip him of his fatherhood in front of everyone they knew. He hadn't just been slighted. He had been erased. And it had happened while he was sitting here, with his mistress, in the middle of the lie that had cost him everything. The gun he had been pointing at our family for months had just been turned, with surgical precision, back on himself. He looked at Chloe, at the champagne, at the life he thought he was building, and realized with sickening clarity that it was all built on a foundation of sand, and his own son had just kicked it out from under him. The ride home from the graduation was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had been haunting our house for weeks. It wasn't heavy with unspoken words or thick with tension. It was a calm, contemplative silence. A silence of after. After the storm. After the battle. After the truth. I kept glancing over at Leo in the passenger seat. He had taken off the graduation gown and was just in his shirt and tie, looking like a young man on his way to his first day of work. He stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban houses roll by. I didn't know what to say. Thank you?
I'm sorry.
Are you okay? All the words felt too small for the magnitude of what had just happened. He spoke first, his voice quiet but steady. I knew, Mom. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands tight on the steering wheel. You knew what, honey? About Dad. And that woman. Chloe, he said her name without any particular venom. It was just a fact. I saw the texts on his tablet a few months ago. He forgot to log out of his account. I saw the hotel reservations, the plane tickets. I knew he wasn't on a business trip. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, parking under the shade of one of the big oak trees that lined our street. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and I saw it all. The maturity, the pain he'd been hiding, the deliberate choice he had made. "Why didn't you say anything?" I whispered. "Because you were trying so hard to hold everything together," he said, finally turning to meet my gaze. His eyes were clear. "You were trying to protect me, and I was trying to protect you. It was stupid. We were both just pretending." He let out a long breath. I've been working on that speech for weeks. I had two versions. Version A, where I thanked both my parents for their love and support. And version B, he gave a small, wry smile. "I decided which one to use when he called you last night. I heard you on the phone. I heard the way your voice broke when you hung up. A wave of love so fierce it was almost painful washed over me." He hadn't acted out of impulsive, teenage anger. He had made a conscious, calculated decision. He had seen the battlefield, assessed the situation, and chosen his side.
He had chosen me.
He had used the most powerful weapon he had, his voice, his platform, his truth, to defend me, to defend us. "Your father is going to be furious," I said, the understatement of the century. "Let him be," Leo said with a shrug. "He doesn't get to be a part of our lives and furious at the same time. He has to pick one inch." In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. The boy I had raised was gone, and in his place was a man of integrity and courage, a man who knew the difference between a house and a home. When we walked through the front door, the house already felt different, lighter. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, was lit up like a Christmas tree. A barrage of texts, all from Mark. The first ones were confused. What the hell was that? Then angry. How could you let him say that? You put him up to this. You've poisoned him against me. Then pleading. Sarah, please call me.
We need to talk about this.
This is a misunderstanding. And finally threatening. You've ruined me. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? You'll regret this. I read them all, one by one, and felt nothing. The words had no power over me anymore. They were just the desperate ramblings of a man who had been exposed. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a villain. He was just a small, weak man who had made a series of selfish choices. And his power to hurt me was gone. I deleted the messages and blocked his number. The graduation party was small, but it was perfect. Our family and closest friends gathered in the backyard. No one mentioned the empty space where Mark should have been. No one mentioned the speech. They just hugged me, hugged Leo, and told him how proud they were. They knew. We didn't need to say a word. We ate cake and opened presents, and for the first time in a long time, the sound of genuine laughter filled our home. The next Monday, I called a lawyer. The divorce was surprisingly swift. Mark, faced with the undeniable evidence of his affair and the public humiliation of the graduation, didn't fight it. He seemed more concerned with salvaging his reputation at work than salvaging his family. He agreed to all my terms, eager to make it all go away. We sold the big house on the street with the oak trees. It was sad to leave, but it was also a relief. It was a house full of ghosts and lies. Leo and I moved into a smaller townhouse closer to the city. It was new and clean and had no memories attached. We painted the walls ourselves, a bright, optimistic shade of yellow. We spent that summer before he left for college exploring our new neighborhood, finding quirky coffee shops and hidden parks. We talked more than we had in years, not about the divorce or the betrayal, but about books, about politics, about his future. We were a team, a family of two. The day I dropped him off at his college dorm was bittersweet. As I helped him unpack his boxes, placing his books on his new shelf, I felt a familiar pang of sadness. But it wasn't the crippling grief I had felt in the gymnasium. It was the healthy, necessary sadness of a mother letting her child go off to build his own life. Before I left, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "for everything." "I'm the one who should be thanking you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. You saved me, you know. He just smiled. We saved each other. Driving away from the campus, I didn't cry. I just felt a quiet sense of peace. The photograph of my old life was gone, torn to pieces. But I wasn't trying to tape it back together anymore. I was starting a new album, one with fewer people in the pictures, but one where every smile was real. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like my own. He drew a line in the sand that day, not with anger, but with truth. And we just stepped over it together into a new life. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had to watch a child be stronger than they should have to be, I'd love to hear your version. Thank you for being here with me. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.